So the next session is on bringing political parties under RTI, fostering inner party democracy. This is being chaired by Dr. Vipul Mudgal, who is trustee of ADR and also the director of Common Cause. I'll request Dr. Vipul to kindly come to the stage.
Thank you, General Verma. We will start from where Jagdeep Chatterjee has left. If you see carefully, political parties problems. Political parties want nota to be effective. Political parties have a problem with electoral bonds. So political parties as entities, political parties एक आदमी चलाता है पॉलिटिकल पार्टी आजकल या एक महिला चलाती है और बहुत खूब चलाती है, बाकी सारे लोग दंडवत हो जाते हैं सामने. So political parties is the elephant in the room. Now this session is on bringing political parties under RTI, fostering inner party democracy. We have a very distinguished panel. We have Mr. T.R. Raghunandan, who's an anti-corruption activist. He's the architect of 73rd, 74th constitutional amendment in India, and in fact, it's not written here, but I'm speaking whatever little I know about him on decentralization, not just in India, anywhere in the world. He's among the biggest authorities on the subject, on anti-corruption. He's been part of India Against Corruption, I Paid a Bribe.com, and now he runs something which is called the something on anti-corruption now. So I'm not reading out the whole thing. We have Mr. Venkatesh Nayak, easily the best informed person on RTI in the country. He's also a convener of National Campaign for People's Right to Information, and he has trained 6,000 people in the use of RTI and probably a bigger number of students in different parts, in IITs, in schools and colleges of Delhi. We have Professor Narayanan, a faculty at School of Policy and Governance, Azim Premji University, Bangalore. Professor Narayanan is a former journalist, academic, public policy expert, and he also works on RTI. And we have Mr. Ruben Mascarenas. He's the National Joint Secretary of Aam Aadmi Party, Campaign Secretary of Aam Aadmi Party, Working President of AAP Mumbai. Wonderful. Okay, so we start in the order in which it is. I mean, I think we give about 8 to 10 minutes. I mean, if you have slides, you can go up to 10 minutes. Otherwise, 8 minutes, and then we leave some time for question and answer. I think this one is an open and shut session. Nobody says don't have RTI. Even political parties say नहीं करना चाहिए, पर हमें ये if but ये वो है. तो ये this is an open and shut case. There is a lot to discuss, but at the same time we'll keep enough time for questions and answers. Okay, so Raghunandan ji.
Well, it's taking some time for my presentation to load. I was wondering whether I should use a presentation at all, because they say that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. But this is actually taken from a long and boring presentation that I have on anti-corruption. And Vipul, old friend, said that I do something on corruption. I basically try to talk to audiences which are not interested in listening to me. So I usually do most of my work on anti-corruption for foreign audiences. So I'm a 100% export-oriented unit when it comes to talking about corruption. See, this morning the sessions were really riveting, and everybody was talking about corruption. Now, as you said, it's a no-brainer that we need the RTI. So I have only one slide on the RTI actually, to say that I believe that we should have RTI for political parties. But I was very struck by what Mr. Sardesai said, and what Mr. Goel, Professor Goel said. They were kind of arguing it from the side of the political party, saying that, hey, listen, we are victims of circumstances. We need to be corrupt. We need to be corrupt because there's some end use for the corrupt money, and if we do not have that end use, and if we are not able to channelize that money, then we are non-starters in the world of politics. And you also pointed that out in your speech. So now I am going to unpack corruption. Because if you unpack corruption and understand where in the corruption universe does political corruption fit, because political corruption doesn't exist as an isolated island. It is connected to all other forms of corruption. Next slide. See, the problem when we tackle corruption is that we think that corruption is this big blob and all corruption is the same. Now, I'm a biologist, so I like taxonomy. Actually, there's a form of taxonomy of corruption. There are different forms of corruption, and the different forms of corruption have to be dealt with differently. And they're all interconnected. So you have these over-the-counter transactions where bribes are collected for a certificate, ration card, and so on and so forth. You have a massive, huge corruption in public procurement. In fact, in Karnataka, the 40% Sarkara slogan itself came out of the recognition by people that there is so much of leakage from public procurements. And you mentioned this whole business of why companies are now getting bribed. That is because of public procurement corruption. And then you have the opposite of public procurement, which is government selling away natural resources, the corruption in mining, urban land, and so on and so forth. You have private sector corruption, which is not criminalized in India. We have a very narrow anti-corruption law which only criminalizes corrupt acts by public servants. And you have regulatory and adjudicatory corruption, and political corruption is linked with all this. Next slide. So what exactly is political corruption? Let's unpack political corruption and look at the flow of corrupt money. One is that you farm corrupt money from the field officers. Like field officers have a prepaid and postpaid system. That is, you pay 50 lakhs to become a chief engineer, and then you pay 10 lakhs every month. And then, in fact, in Karnataka, we had a great instance of a sub-registrar sitting in front of a minister's house after she was suspended, saying that, please return my deposit, because I paid a bribe to get the job, but then you didn't allow me to continue there for long. So then you have these big single kickbacks in procurement contracts, unaccounted contributions to political parties, and including electoral rolls, about which we have spoken a lot, payments made by business interests and others for questions asked in legislatures, cash for questions, scams, and of course, internal transactions within parties, cash given to people within parties. So if you unpack what are the transactions that lead to inflows of corrupt money in a political system, this is very quickly what it means. Where does this money go? Next slide, if you look at the outflows of corrupt money, the biggest outflow is bribing of voters. It's not campaigns. It's not what Professor Rajiv Gowda told in the morning. Nobody wants to talk about this, but this is bribing of voters. Voters are beginning to ask, what's in it for me? They see it as payback. I agree with you that it is actually distributive economics, and we must look at it from that lens. So this is payback time. So bribing of voters is something that is so huge, and this is where the people have become insatiable. And then, of course, fund expensive election campaigns, and our rules and laws allow it, because political party combined funding is not counted. So there's a beautiful, nice little loophole there. Bribe media to provide favorable reports. We all know about Thakurdar's report in the press council about paid news. It started about 10 years back. You have engineering defections, going to resorts and so on and so forth, and channelize money into private pockets of politicians. In fact, there is a lot of honesty about corruption. They say, ये बंदा तो बहुत honest बंदा है, क्योंकि वो पार्टी का पैसा अपना पॉकेट में नहीं डालते, पार्टी को ही देते हैं. So this is how the money goes. Now, under these circumstances, I would like you to revisit our assessments of political parties and just imagine that if you were a politician, and if you were standing for election, or if you just got into the system, how will you manage to remain competitive? You will have to bribe voters, and that's the biggest problem here. Now, what is happening in India, and this is seen in the literature on anti-corruption, is that we are into a situation where there's something called hyper-corruption. Hyper-corruption is a situation where the disease becomes cancerous and the interconnections become part of a market chain. And the literature reveals that when a country gets into a hyper-corrupt situation, it takes sometimes 40, 50, 60 years for a country to get out of it. We all talk about the United States as, yes, it's corrupt now, but it's a kind of manageable corruption. Between 1865 and 1930, that is between the Civil War and the Great Depression, it was one of the most corrupt places in the planet because of hyper-corruption. We in India, and it's my belief that we are already stuck in this, and it's very paradoxical that almost every party, if you look at perceptions of corruption on over-the-counter transactions, it has reduced in India, which means that every party has now decided that we will keep we are so corrupt that we can afford to do certain things honestly. And so we will deliver services over the counter to people that will be squeaky clean, but the rest of it, the public procurement, because all this is shielded from public eyes. You are not directly affected by public procurement corruption. You see bad roads, etc., but you don't see it as a personal, somebody putting his or her hand into your pocket. Whereas that's not the way you see an over-the-counter transaction. Next slide. Now, how do countries eliminate corruption? How do they go from high corruption to low corruption? And there's a nice pattern here. What happens is, there is a regular measurement of corruption which leads to systems improvement. This is a positively reinforcing cycle. And then you have whistleblower protection, which leads to swift punishment of the corrupt. And that is not enough, because through this, there is a common thread of ethical education, teaching children that honesty pays, and so on and so forth. This is a very simplified diagram of how countries have gotten out of corruption. And there are any number of case studies that show that if you invest your time in these concepts, you can actually reduce corruption. And how do you measure corruption? There are different ways of measuring corruption, and this is where the RTI comes in. Your use of RTI for political parties is a tool to measure the extent of corruption, which is by examining their accounts and so on and so forth, so that then you can take the corrective mechanism. So RTI is a tool that leads to something else. Right? So we now see the RTI in the context of controlling corruption of a political party. However, the problem is that the RTI law as of today, on a plain reading, excludes political parties from the definition of public authorities. This is what the law says. Are you going to go back to the same beneficiaries and victims of the corrupt system today to tell them to amend the law so that they come under the RTI? All luck to you. Good luck to you. Good luck to you. But is there something else that you could do? Sometimes when you understand an interconnected system, you might suddenly realize that a corrective applied somewhere else can actually cure your problem. It doesn't look intuitive at the first step. And to my mind, and this is something I've been saying a long time, and I'll stop after that, is that today when I have seen corruption of voters happening, because my sister stood as a candidate and I went as her election agent. And it's very interesting to see how bribes are paid. And this was in Bangalore city, in the heart of Bangalore city. My sister is a former IAS officer, so am I. She was the Rural Development Secretary who launched NREGA, so she's got a solid reputation. She lost her deposit, right? But we were offered a bribe to withdraw her candidature. She was thrown out of a restaurant at one point because the restaurant was owned by a rival candidate, and a waiter came to take a selfie with her, and the waiter was fired on the spot. She protested, she was thrown out. I was manhandled and roughed up by the police at a counting center. So all this we've seen. But let me tell you how bribery happens. The candidate comes, or the candidate's goon comes, takes your voting card away from you, pays you the first installment of the bribe, and takes a selfie with you standing with the voting identity card. All this creates an impression that, hey, listen, I'm taking your card, I don't still trust that you're going to vote for me, and I'm keeping a selfie for some kind of record. This process itself is scary for the voter. Then on the day of election, the rest of the money is given, and the card is given back to that individual, and I can bet that that person is going to vote for you. Now, can you break this cycle of quid pro quo? You can. The only way to do it is to have a system by mixing the votes of different ballot boxes. And it is my belief, and it's a very old-fashioned belief, that you cannot do it unless you dispense with electronic voting machines and go back to ballot papers. I'll end by saying that I was, in 1989, the returning officer of India's largest parliamentary constituency, which was Uttarahalli parliamentary constituency in Bangalore, South Bangalore. It was a huge constituency. Of those days, of course, the numbers are laughable by today's standards. There were 4.5 lakh voters. Those days, the practice was that all the ballot boxes, the votes would be brought in, they would be put into large drums and mixed around in a drum. And it took about 8 hours for us to pick out the ballot papers, bundle them up in bundles of 50, and then the counting started. The counting was completed in 22 hours. I think that's time well spent to anonymize the vote. The moment that you are able to anonymize the vote completely, you break the cycle of quid pro quo. Otherwise, openly in Bangalore, I have heard politicians threatening that, listen, I gave you this much of money, I expect 700 votes to come from your polling booth, but if only I get 100, and if I still win, you're not going to get your water supply. You're not going to get your electricity supply. I have seen this on gated community WhatsApp group discussions. So today, the problem is that counting ballot papers or ballots, box-wise or machine-wise, is actually partially compromising the secrecy of the ballot. It enables parties to keep track of whether the bribes they have paid on a polling booth-wise basis has actually translated into votes for them. And God forbid if they win without the votes from that place, then you rest assured that they can undertake reprisals against you. And so to my mind, it is that solution that you apply there which might incentivize them to drop bribery as the largest outflow of corrupt money. I hope you get the process flow here. And if you get rid of bribery as the largest outflow, then the amount of money that a political party actually requires to conduct an effective campaign will vastly reduce, which means that the pressure on your RTI to get this data also reduces. I am not for a moment saying that you should not have RTI. I'm just saying that by adopting this kind of a counterintuitive approach, you might actually achieve or at least minimize the pain of the situation as you see it today. Thank you very much.
My dear friend Vipul, my very distinguished co-panelists, Dr. Ranade, Professor Chokar, Professor Shastri, and all other distinguished guests and friends from ADR. I really thank you for the opportunity given to me to come here and speak with you, share some of my ideas, and I'm going to say that I'm going to put before you a very different proposition as to why political parties must be transparent. RTI is only one of the methods of making them transparent. And here I would like to very respectfully beg to disagree with some of the things. I mean, I have a lot of respect. I know Mr. Raghunandan may not remember me, but I have very closely followed his work and I've met him once before in a conference. He's also a fellow Bangalorean. And, but I come from a very different ideological position. And that's a position that I've actually changed after a lot of rumination since 2013 and in the course of discussions with particularly Professor Chokar, whom I consider one of my mentors. The point where I disagree, my first disagreement is with the proposition that the right to information law does not cover RTIs. It is not designed to be so. That is a canard that babus in central government have spread. Let me be very frank about that, because I've had this discussion with a gentleman who was the secretary of the Department of Personnel and Training in charge of RTI implementation, who said, but look at the preamble, look at the definition of public authorities. It does not cover public authorities because the preamble says very clearly that this is a law meant to make government and its instrumentalities accountable to the governed. How can political parties be considered instrumentalities of the government? So my counter to that proposition is simply this. Today, given an ideal situation, if India were to be that ideal democracy, it would continue to be a functional democracy in the absence of a civil society. Be it ADR, be it CHRI, be it NCPRI, be it Common Cause, it cannot function as a democracy in the absence of political parties. Political parties are so central to the idea of a government that is elected by the people. So, political parties are not instrumentalities of government, but political parties are the instrumentalities to capturing government power. So it is a higher pedestal which political parties are applying, and therefore they must be transparent. They are aiming to capture power. The second part of my proposition, and here I would like to very respectfully beg to disagree with some of the arguments that have been placed before the Supreme Court. I've been part of that whole exercise. I've watched it. I've intervened in it 2013 onwards, where Central Information Commission declared 6 national political parties. Today there are more, and one of them probably is no longer a national party, as to why they are public authorities. And this, I don't want to go into the details because I don't have the time. the single foundational principle that the Information Commission found was that they are substantially financed. Today, by looking at the finances of political parties, and particularly the kinds of presentations that we've had from friends like Nitin, we know that the substantial financing, whether it is direct or indirect, does not come from government sources. It comes from the public. There is a second argument that was taken, something stronger, which we sort of co-invented in the course of discussions as to how to make the case stronger when political parties refuse to comply with the CIC's decision of 2013, where we said, kindly look at the 10th schedule of the Constitution of India, which contains the anti-defection law. The term political parties is mentioned there, not because somebody had an itch to scratch, but the anti-defection law is particularly placed there to ensure that after elections, politics remains reasonably clean, and defection from one party to another, party hopping doesn't happen. So therefore, the stronger basis now after the CIC decision is that a political party, if it is registered with the Election Commission and it has a presence in the House, either at the state level or the central level, it becomes a body that is established or constituted under the Constitution of India, which is another criteria for a public authority to be considered as being covered by the RTI Act. But the practicality of it, political parties don't want to comply. ना तो वो हाई कोर्ट में जा रहे हैं बोलने के लिए कि ये आदेश गलत है इंफॉर्मेशन कमीशन का, इसको खारिज कर दीजिए, वो भी नहीं बोल रहे हैं, और उसका अनुपालना भी नहीं कर रहे हैं. तो ऐसी स्थिति में क्या करेंगे? So there has to be a different basis. Now the different basis is my third proposition. And that proposition is something that many of you will not like, and you might be actually surprised that it is coming from somebody who spent about 18 years promoting RTI. Very often when I conduct training workshops for civil society representatives or for media persons or for students, I ask them, why do you think RTI is important? And the answer often is, there is corruption, there is abuse of power, there is a mismanagement of natural resources. So there is always a problem that somebody is trying to solve through RTI. And very often it is actually based on, why do you need transparency? A lot of people say, because we need to know what the government needs to do, what the government is doing. तो क्यों आपको चाहिए, सरकार क्या करे वो तो बता ही रही है, अपना PR डिपार्टमेंट खोल रखा है, मीडिया रिलेशंस डिपार्टमेंट खोल रखा है, वो जो बातें आपको बता रहे हैं वो आप समझ लीजिएगा, और क्या ज़रूरत है? नहीं, वो जो चीज़ें वो नहीं बता रहे हैं वो हमें समझने की ज़रूरत है. Which means that you are actually expressing indirectly a trust deficit with the government. Can lack of trust be the basis for a relationship between something as important as the citizenry and a set of people who say they want to represent the citizenry at the highest lawmaking authority in the country? It cannot be a basis, adequate basis. It is a basis, practically speaking. The entire anti-corruption movement in Rajasthan, in Maharashtra, in several other places are based on that. Why do we need transparency? We need to know how the government is spending our money. So then I turn the question around and say, supposing tomorrow, let us say that there is no corruption. Everything is working perfectly fine. But government will still say, I will decide what information I will give you. No corruption. Do you still want RTI? And then people start scratching their heads. I say, therefore, it can't be a basis. The basis for RTI as far as government-citizen relationship is concerned, that democracy is, as Abe Lincoln pointed out, government of the people, by the people, for the people. When you are stakeholders, you can't hide information from me. You have to share the information with me, whatever is in the public interest. Where disclosure of information will harm the public interest, the law will say कि वो जानकारी देने की ज़रूरत नहीं है क्योंकि उससे सार्वजनिक हित को नुकसान पहुंच सकता है. That is understandable. But what will then be the basis for demand for transparency from people vis-a-vis political parties? The basis is simply this, that you as a political party are the only entity in my country who stands up and says that I want to represent you in parliament. I want to represent you in the state assembly, in the Vidhan Sabha. And probably at a later date, I want to represent you in the urban or the rural local bodies. So when somebody says they want to represent me, or when I say me, I mean as an individual, but that applies to all of you, then don't you think we have a right to ask them what they are doing? Why do they want to represent us? How do they plan to represent us? How are they planning to raise their finances in order to represent us? What is the source of the money that they are getting for us? So there is a more positive basis here. I am accepting. It doesn't mean that I have to vote for you. They may not even come to power, but the moment they say that we want to represent you, that relationship of trust. Why? It's called something that is part of 81E of the RTI Act, fiduciary relationship. A trust-based relationship develops. Yes. That develops. That has to be the basis for any measure. And here I won't say amend the RTI Act, I know it's difficult. I will not say bring a new law like in Fiji. There's a special law that enables Fijians, Indo-Fijians and indigenous Fijians to walk into the office of a political party and demand to inspect their records. By law, they have a right. I'm not saying get that because it's a far, cry, it's a faraway dream. Maybe in some generation it might come true. But until then, what do we do? And this is my last point. Until then, make use of the right to information law to ask information about political parties that is already available with other public authorities. The compilation of decisions which ADR has put in the materials kit, please take a look at it. You will be surprised to know that what they got in the form of income tax returns in 2008, it has been denied to me last year. It has not been institutionalized as a matter of transparency. नहीं आ रहा है क्यों? बहुत कम लोग हम मांग रहे हैं. इनकम टैक्स डिपार्टमेंट से मांगे, फाइनेंस डिपार्टमेंट से मांगे, इलेक्शन कमीशन से मांगे पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज के बारे में जानकारी. So that is one way of building a pressure on political parties to be more transparent towards people until we reach that day when a law can be passed either to amend the RTI Act and include them fairly and squarely, or to have a separate regulatory law that will govern the internal working of political parties. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me here as part of this very exciting and relevant discussion. I come from a university, therefore the expectation may be that I have to theorize all that has been spoken so far, or at least quantify it and present before you. I am not going to do that. Let me start by asking a very, very practical and possibly a political question. Now, if you see the trajectory of this entire debate and efforts aimed at bringing political parties under the purview of RTI, we have to ask a significant question, and that question is it possible for anyone in this country to get something done when the entire political establishment is in unison opposing it? That is the question that the future researcher will have to ask about these efforts which has been going on for a decade now by organizations like AD, Association for Democratic Reforms, and other organizations, involving Information Commission, involving the Supreme Court, etc. Is there any other issue on which all political parties have stood together and said, no, we don't want this? And when all political parties say, with regard to this, we don't want this, is it possible for us to achieve the goal that is before us? Now, having asked this question, let me paint three possible scenarios before you, future scenarios. Two of which are very pessimistic, and the third one is going to be a little optimistic. Optimistic it will be if you are a congenital optimist. Okay. Now, what are the two pessimistic scenarios that are in front of us? First, now the matter is before the Supreme Court. I wish the previous speakers had presented the trajectory of how this fight has been going on. Anyway, I'm not getting into that. Otherwise, I can't cover my 3 points in the time that has been given to me. But just for the information of this audience, the matter is pending before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will have to decide, based on all the arguments that Venkatesh has now presented before us, whether the ambit of RTI applies to political parties or not. Now, for a moment, let us assume that the Supreme Court is going to decide in favor of the demand. that RTI is going to apply to political parties, and political parties are going to be bound, will have to be bound by the provisions of RTI. Let us assume that the Supreme Court is going to give this verdict. Now, we may think that this is the end of the story, but I think it is not going to be the end of the story, given the virulent position that the political parties have taken. Just to see some of the political debates, some of the debates that have taken place on TV studios and platforms like this, after the commission, the Information Commission, gave its verdict. The political parties are very angry. They are showing such a kind of unity in this, saying that no, there are, they come out with various arguments, and arguments are not, all of them are not silly either, right? Now, therefore, what will happen in case the Supreme Court gives a judgment in favor of the demand? I think we are going to see a second Keshavananda Bharati in this country, which is the entire legislature and political establishment fighting with the judiciary to ensure that the political parties are not going to be under the purview of the RTI. They are protecting something which we do not know what they are protecting. We'll come to that later. So I hope this audience is familiar with this Keshavananda Bharati case. The question there was whether Parliament can change or amend the Constitution in the way that it wanted. And the Supreme Court at some point in time said that no, you can't touch fundamental rights. You can change other parts, but not fundamental rights. But the Parliament was not happy, and that was a 30-year battle between the Parliament and the Supreme Court. And finally, it settles down in some form in Keshavananda Bharati judgment. And Keshavananda Bharati is now reopened, because even now the political establishment is not happy with the compromise position that the judgment has given. And the same thing is going to happen in case Supreme Court is going to give a favorable judgment. That's my point number one. Therefore, it is a pessimistic scenario. Now, let us assume that the Supreme Court is going to give a favorable judgment, and the political parties are not going to fight it. They are going to accept it. And you all can file your RTI and get the information from the political parties. I don't know what kind of information, apart from funding aspects, one can get from political parties or demand from political parties, whatever it may be. Now, for a moment, let us assume that the political parties are going to accept it and are going to willingly give information to you on whenever an RTI application is filed. Now, here, then what? Transparency possibly is ensured. Now, the theory tells us, the theories of governance tell us that transparency does not automatically translate into accountability. Now, if there is one area of governance and politics in India where the translation of transparency into accountability is extremely difficult, I think it is in this. The openness of the system and in the electoral, the information that the electorate is going to get because of the RTI about political parties and their dealings and their background and whatever, and the electoral choice. To my mind, it appears that however well-informed the electorate is going to be because of the strength of the RTI, all the anomalies that are there now in terms of choice, the electorate's choice of candidates will continue. Some of these aspects were discussed in the morning, why this will happen. A lot has been said about the role of money, right? Now, what is that you are going to get by filing RTI to a political party? You are going to get the information that they are getting their money from A, B, C, D sources, and they have amassed a lot of money, from sources which they should not have been collecting, etc. But that hardly matters to the electorate. Now, in the morning, my friend from Flame University gave a different scenario altogether. He said, if the electorate is well informed, they make a better choice. Now, he based that argument on certain papers, and the findings of those papers were based on some kind of experiments, right? Randomized controlled trial. And why do you have to go for randomized controlled trial? We have data in front of us. I'll give you 3 examples. Now, the electorate today is more or better informed than ever before in India, right? Because of the efforts of institutions like ADR, because of a judgment, again, Election Commission now wants the candidates to file their criminal and financial background, right? And it's all there in the public. Of course, there is an accessibility issue, whether people come to know about it, etc. It's a different thing, but more information is there in the public domain. Third, after social media, after WhatsApp, all kinds of information about all kinds of candidates are landing on your mobile, right? So at any point in time today, the electorate in India is better informed than ever before. At least that much of argument we can make. Now, it is during this period you have the kind of findings that ADR reports are coming out year after year. The reports tell you that during this period, the number of candidates with the criminal antecedents are contesting more in number. It is during this period that the amount of money that you have to spend on elections has multiplied. Now, therefore, the argument that I'm going to make is that there is no direct correlation between how well informed the citizen is, voter is, and the kind of the choice that he is going to make or she is going to make. So therefore, this is a pessimistic future scenario, even if everything goes fine. Now, therefore, what is the third possibility? The third possibility is that we have to accept one thing, which is that as long as this political system continues the way it operates, and as long as we have kept our political parties in the way they are, right, there is no way you can have the kind of accountability that you are seeking through measures like RTI. In other words, what I'm going to say here is that it is possible for us to see a free and fair election system in India only when we replace the current political parties with this new set of political parties, and those new set of political parties will have to operate on the principle that it is possible to fight elections in this country without having to spend so much. Now, as long as there is demand, right? Everyone who has spoken this morning and now are talking about the issue only from the supply side, saying that, okay, let us prevent by using law A, law B, let us mix the ballots, therefore, something can happen, etc. No. If there is demand for political party, there is demand for money on the part of political parties to fight election, somehow they will mobilize it, right? So the only possibility we can envisage, of course, it is not going to happen overnight. Overnight, when we have a situation where it is possible for us to fight elections without having to spend so much money. And whether it is possible, and most of you think that I am presenting a very idealistic picture here. No, there are three kinds of, I'll conclude by making this statement. There are three kinds of changes that are happening in Indian politics today. One, the politics is getting more and more professionalized. Therefore, you have all kinds of consultants who were unheard of in decades ago entering into the field. Second, those who get elected are seeking more and more professional advice. So therefore, you have institutions like PRS, which sends fellows to work with MPs, etc. Now, there is a third kind of change which has been happening in Indian politics, which is that there have been innumerable experiments which are working on this principle of, is it possible to win elections in this country from panchayats to parliament without having to spend so much of money and without having to resort to the kind of things which political parties in general generally resort to, caste, religion, etc. And this might sound a little unrealistic now, but it is time that we document all these micro level experiments which are going on in Indian politics. There are far too many youngsters there with starry-eyed, and they are trying to do something. And somebody said in the morning that youth are not getting, taking interest. Some of these institutions are started by the youth. I can give one example. There are many. One girl in Orissa, she has started an all-women political party. And she is trying to, it will take maybe 3-4 decades for her to convince women to vote for her party. It doesn't matter. But people are working on models, political models, where you don't need so much of money and so much of resorting to questionable means to win elections. And unless this happens, RTI alone cannot cleanse the system. That's the point. Thank you.
Dr. Ajit ji, who's been very supportive of my work, thank you for this opportunity. Professor Shastri, Major General Verma, Dr. Vipul, my esteemed co-panelists, and my dear friends. As the only politician, I would like to take all of the 10 minutes and not just 8, despite me not having a presentation. 2-3 things. I'll take off from where Raghu mentioned, and even my previous co-panelist, the Professor Narayan, that it is possible to win elections without money power, without muscle power, and without divisive agenda. It is possible. And what we are trying to do, and I will today speak both as a young politician as well as a student of law. It is the same clean politics in new political culture which enables a 35-year-old like me without any political background to head the Aam Aadmi Party in Mumbai. So it is possible. On a panel like this, no one will actually disagree with the purpose, as Dr. Vipul mentioned. So we are not arguing about an instrument. It is not essentially about you or me being against democracy, but we are arguing about a specific instrument. So let's look at the threshold. There are things that are good to know. There are things that need to be known. And there are things that must be known. These are different levels of knowing, and these are not essentially the same things. When we talk about a disclosure law, we need to make a distinction between these three. Disclosure law only applies to what we must know. I'm all for parties being under RTI, but only for the funding part. I'll explain to you why there is a slight disagreement. The party's refusal, and this is what I theorize for other parties, not just for me, is the result of a single fact. Because the question being asked is too binary. Should political parties come under RTI? Instead of asking that question, had the question been asked, reveal your source of funding, then I think there is no debate about it. Because if you say that if you agree to the whole law, then that means that you also have to agree with everything that you don't agree to. Now, let me give you an example. I am all for transparency, I am not for nakedness. Let me explain. When we started the Aam Aadmi Party, I remember being one of the founder members, every donation that we got would automatically go to our website, okay? Even you donate 50 rupees, that will also go to your website. What happened as soon as we were all completely transparent? All our donors got calls. All our top donors got raided. First of all, there is no political culture of giving in this country. Please understand that. When I go to fundraise, people ask me, "Arey, you're already in power in Delhi and Punjab, why are you asking for money?" So there is no culture. There's no culture that we need to donate to a political party. Now in such an atmosphere, we were all transparent, but our transparency was literally used against us. And it's very difficult to actually raise honest money. You require some money. Even in this new model of clean politics and new political culture, without money, muscle power, and divisive agenda, you still need some money. And that, while there should be transparency, I'm just giving you our example. So now we now file it with the Election Commission, but all of it doesn't go on our website. Just because our donors say that, hey, I don't want to donate to you because I have the agencies breathing down my neck. Because to be fair, in an authoritarian state, like we are right now, rather than an authoritarian regime, transparency is a double-edged sword sometimes. Then I proceed to political parties. Venkateshji, I slightly beg to differ. Political parties are in which domain? Political parties are in the domain which they operate and are not formally the state. The location of political parties is that they fall between state and society. The state apparatus is responsible for governance, and various mechanisms for representation of People's Act provides for public representation, both by individuals as well as entities which can contest. So, political parties are governments in waiting. Political parties aggregate political demand. And then the larger question there is can you regulate civil society if parties are civil society? Or you think of parties as quasi-state? I don't think so. Further, we should also ask a question, is it a good thing to do? Is it a necessary thing to do? Source of funding, I think everybody agrees. And why do we need the source of funding? Because we need to find out who is trying to influence this political party. Is this person's vested interest being promoted by the party? And are things being favorably legislated for that particular person? Therefore, who is giving money to the party should be public. But as I said, sometimes, not everyone who is giving the party anonymously is always maliciously trying to influence outcomes. Because if they are not quite, sometimes there is pressure from society. Because there are competing interests around. So the first part is the funding thing. I think everybody is on the same page. The second is inner party democracy. Inner party democracy is desirable, but is not the role of the government to ensure it. Political parties are instruments created by founders and supporters to advocate certain causes. The party decided to organize it in a certain way to pursue those causes. If party members are comfortable with that, what is the business of the government? RTI is primarily a disclosure law. It is right to information and not to right to democratic functioning of the party. Next point, transparency in ticket distribution. These are not the goals of a disclosure law. Disclosure law is what is going on, what has gone on. There are other remedies available for people who don't like the party, they can leave it. If I'm a donor to a party, then I have a right to ensure that the money is spent in a manner presented by the party. It is a contractual obligation, but it is not a violation of the right to information per se. But that does not mean that law gives me a right. Electoral bonds don't meet that test. There is no way to know if any donor has undue influence over any party. And there's no way to know if there is one part, in terms of the types of corruption, there's no way to know whether the government is arm twisted to someone to get money. And let me give you an example. Without taking names, I happen to know an industrialist. And that industrialist, before a state assembly election, had purchased some crores worth of electoral bonds. Okay. After a few days, he suddenly gets a call from some party, which all of us know which party. And that person says, sir, आपने bond तो खरीदे लेकिन हमको हमारे account में दिखाई नहीं दिए. तो कब आऊँ मैं लेने के लिए? So he actually thought that he'll actually divide the bonds into different parties and different players, but he couldn't. He just got a call and said, hey, we know you purchased the bonds, we want the bonds here. So there are all kinds of pressures being applied by the government of the day. People file RTI and discover what the government has done. So public are stakeholders, yes, they're not shareholders. When it comes to law, we need to make a distinction between purpose and instrument. We agree with the purpose, but whether a single instrument should be used to pursue goals, or whether a single instrument can deliver multiple goals, the point that Mr. Narayan made. For example, if you want more leaders, you put term limits. You put 2 terms for public office, you'll get more leaders. So we have to ask for whatever goal that we set, is this the right instrument to pursue it? Now let me speak about party strategy. Strategy of a political party and the way it develops its positions, what it considers, what it rejects, form part of political strategy of the party. The political strategy of a political party doesn't have to be in public domain. We would like to know, let me give you an example. Let's say there's a cricket board, and let's say you ask the cricket board, we want to know the strategy that you use to select the team. Now that can't be revealed to the opposition. Opposition needs to know the position of a political party, doesn't need to know how that political party arrived at that. So, long story short, public interest is whether a political party receives money. I'm willing to reveal that. But maybe sometimes not to my opponents, but maybe to an independent body. Perhaps that can be, not all disclosure means disclosure to the government. Political parties compete with each other to win elections. Hence, the strategy needs to be kept secret. Give me a minutes of the steering committee meeting, etc. may actually put the party at a disadvantage. So if we think of RTI as a way of reforming political parties, then we should make it part of a package of other reforms. There should be proportional representation, there should be term limits and so on and so forth. We must not think that RTI is the only instrument we have to that end. Thank you so much for having listened to me.
Good afternoon. This debate has been very good, but I'm sorry to say, Ruben, that you are just I'm Vinita Deshmukh and I'm a journalist and I belong to Pune. So my point is that Venkatesh has just given some solid foundation on why the CIC decision is there and why political parties come under RTI. So you cannot have some selective measures that you can ask this question and not ask that questions. Because one of the things is that the political parties are using government land, they're using so many things of the government that they have to come under the RTI Act. And the political party is directly affecting a large citizenry. And because it's of large public interest, the political parties must come under RTI. And you mentioned about your donors being hounded. So there is a Section 8, and there is some names can be kept private. Some information need not be given. But there is no question that we are all here suffering because of political parties. And they damn have to be transparent and answerable to the people. But I really respect that Section 8 is there, already their provision is there. So there's no, very big deal. And anybody who's really, my earlier speaker, feeling sorry that the political parties will be hounded on the election commission, damn, they are our servants. We are their lords and we are being treated like slaves with pothole roads and Maharashtra drama antics, one monkey going to another party. I have voted for the party and he goes to some other party which I hate, and then he comes back here. We have had enough of these guys being opaque, and RTI should be harshest and as far as political parties are concerned. I'm sorry. Bye.
Hello, I'm Mr. Chaudhary and ex-engineer. So I got very little to do with either politics or RTI or anything what we are talking about. But during since last 10 years, I have felt the necessity of the politics to change in a major way. And one way I think we can do is to adopt what we can call as a national government. The parties, the elections can go on the way they are. But once the person becomes a member of the assembly, he becomes apolitical. All members become a part of the ruling. The ministries are allotted on prorata basis.
Yeah.
And that this will solve a lot of problems, I think.
Perfect. Yeah. Sir.
Hello, I'm Bhaskar Prabhu from Maharashtra. Basically, the Election Commission has not blankly said that 6 political parties to be, they have said they are public authorities. They have just not said that they are political parties. 6 political parties are public authorities. So they have been declared public authorities on the basis of RTI clauses only. The other is that because they are taking substantial funding, they have got a substantial land allotment, blah, 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 whatever is there. And the second is that whoever has not read the RTI Act or anything, they should not comment only on the RTI. Nobody has filed, if somebody previous speaker said, I have never applied an RTI.
That's okay.
Okay.
Apna point
Now the
rakhiye.
thing is that okay, I do not know why there are ifs and buts from the political party, why they should not be. I can be only transparent for this much. I can only transparent here. Everybody is hounded, boss. RTI activists are the most killed persons in India. Nearly 90 people have been murdered. 100 people have been murdered. We have reached a century. There are many who have been maimed. There are many who have been victimized. So this hounding part is for everybody. Whoever comes to the ruling party, they will be hounded. They will be hounded like that. So let us not have an excuse that कि हमारे donors का पता चलेगा. अरे RTI वालों के भी जो भी मदद करता है उसका भी पता चलता है. कोई ये नहीं है उसमें. बड़ी बात नहीं है. So let us not be very conservative on the basis मेरे को पैसा कौन देता है, मेरे को ये देता है, hounding होता है, वो सबके सब equality में पैसा देते हैं. टाटा भी अगर देता है तो ruling party वाले को ज़्यादा देता है, opposition को थोड़ा कम देते हैं. Whoever they come on the next time, so let us not have that basis as a criteria for not being a transparent. This should be the message which all political parties should take, and they should publish everything. The second is that the minutes of the meeting, that you can take section 8 as a clause and strategies and everything. You need not come publish it on the next side. That is my opinion. It may be some different opinion also. So there are clauses under the RTI not to be, but we will not be transparent as per to the expectation of the citizen is not expected.
We understand this.
First of all, let's not turn this into a tutu meme kind of a debate. There will be views that will be favoring confidentiality for certain aspects, and it's a legitimate expectation as far as their perspective is concerned. But laws cannot be designed only from the perspective of one school of thought or one line of thinking. It has to apply to society as a whole and the kind of thinking that society has at that particular point of time. The laws will reflect that. Now, I see and understand the view that our good friend Ruben has placed in front of us. It's nothing new. The opposition to transparency of political parties as far as all of their dealings are concerned is a very American school of thought, and it is pretty valid there. But question is whether we need it in our country. I'll give an example. No, please give me half a minute. It is not about finances alone, please. When your party member sits in the Lok Sabha and votes in favor of the bill that decides to bifurcate Jammu and Kashmir into 2 union territories and take away the special status that has been given there, we have a right to know, despite not being in Kashmiri, why your party has taken that stand. Similarly, if one opposition party does not support your position that the ordinance that has been issued, which will eventually become law, to take away the powers to control civil service in Delhi, and some party votes in favor of that law, the other party has a right to know, people have a right to know why you have taken that stance. Please understand, transparency of political parties goes far beyond sources of funding. Thank you.
No. So, 2-3 things. One is, I think, Vanita ji, just to quickly respond, we are all for RTI. We are all for political parties being under RTI. What I shared was with my personal experience. As a party, that is our formal position, that we welcome being accountable. So that's one. Second is, I shared my genuine experience. This is like day-to-day experience. We talk about this new political culture. That is what, these are essentially the impediments to get there. And what I said was essentially my concerns. And maybe, Bhaskar ji, they can be accommodated in your section 8, as you were saying. But nonetheless, this is essentially what our experience has been. And I speak firsthand from that experience. And I'd like to end on that note that I am contesting the upcoming BMC elections. We don't know when is that going to happen. But whenever that happens, I intend to win that election in my ward in Juhu without money, muscle power, and divisive agenda. Thank you so much. And being transparent. Thank you so much.
I completely agree with Venkatesh that political parties should be subject to the RTI. But I am just saying, as a lawyer, if you read that section 2H or whatever, on a plain reading, it doesn't look like it covers the political parties. That's all that I am saying. Number one. Number two, is in that kind of situation, which is how I interpret it, I think we must seriously address the issue of political corruption, in which RTI could be a potential instrument, but at the same time we must explore other instruments that reduces the incentive for a political party to take bribes. And here I'm going to say something that might sound so ridiculous, but a lot of people in political parties, if left to themselves, if they did not have to bribe voters, would not take bribes. They don't like what they are doing. They don't like. There are many people. In every party, there are conscientious objectors to corruption and bribing of voters, but they are completely marginalized within their own political parties. Let's give those people in every political party a fighting chance to convince their parties that let's not take bribes, let the tide, lowering tide, lower all the boats at the same time without reducing the competitiveness of political parties. And I think
something on national government?
Yes, and as far as the national government is concerned, that is exactly what Switzerland does. Switzerland has 4 parties. All the 4 parties stand for election, and once they are elected to parliament, all party distinctions disappear. There are only 7 ministers in Switzerland, and the ministership is divided between the 4 political parties in the ratio of 2:2:2:1, based on their proportional votes. And the presidency of Switzerland changes every year. One person becomes, of those 7, becomes the president. And I once asked a Swiss person, because I teach in Switzerland, I asked them, this is a fabulous system. How did you get to do it? Can we do it in India? He said, we fought and killed each other for 700 years before deciding on this.
Yeah. So whatever political parties may say, they must come under the purview of RTI, given there is no argument about it. I don't know what the Supreme Court is going to decide, but that is the position. However, to expect that all the problems that we have in today's political system and with the political party system is going to be reduced even a bit because of this is an expectation far too much. And political parties, with all their murky dealings out in the public, can live happily and keep winning.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you to be such good listeners, such good audience. And thank you, the panelists.